There is a small yellow sponge living at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, in a pineapple, in a town called Bikini Bottom. He wakes up every single morning with the exact same enthusiasm. He goes to the exact same job. He flips the exact same patties. And at the end of every single day, he is genuinely, completely, unreasonably happy. His name is SpongeBob SquarePants. And whether you watched him as a child or you are hearing about him now for the first time in a while, there is something about this character that has endured for over 25 years. Something that goes far beyond children's entertainment. Because SpongeBob is not just a cartoon character. He is, whether the creators intended it or not, one of the most fascinating philosophical figures in modern animation. And tonight, we are going to explore exactly why. We are going to look at SpongeBob through the lens of some of history's greatest thinkers. We will talk about Albert Camus and the philosophy of the absurd. We will examine Squidward through the eyes of Jean-Paul Sartre. We will look at Patrick Star and ask whether ignorance truly is bliss. We will dissect Mr. Krabs as one of television's most honest portrayals of capitalist philosophy. And we will ask a question that sounds ridiculous on the surface, but is actually deeply serious when you sit with it long enough. What can a cartoon sponge teach us about how to live a meaningful life? So settle in, get comfortable, and let us begin. SpongeBob SquarePants premiered on Nickelodeon on May 1st, 1999. It was created by Steven Hillenburg, a marine science educator who had previously worked as a marine biology teacher at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California. Before SpongeBob ever appeared on television, Hillenburg created an unpublished educational comic book called The Intertidal Zone in the 1980s. That comic was designed to teach his students about undersea life, and many of its ideas would eventually evolve into what we now know as Bikini Bottom. Hillenburg was not just an animator. He was a scientist first. He studied marine resource planning and interpretation at Humboldt State University before pursuing animation at the California Institute of the Arts. This dual background, this fusion of science and art, is essential to understanding why SpongeBob works. The show was built by someone who genuinely understood the ocean, who knew the difference between a sea sponge and a kitchen sponge, and who chose to create a character that looked like a kitchen sponge, but behaved with the resilience and adaptability of a real marine organism. That is not an accident. That is philosophy embedded into the character design itself. Hillenburg served as the showrunner for the first 3 seasons of SpongeBob, from 1999 through 2004. He stepped back after the release of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie in November of 2004, and the show continued without his direct involvement for several seasons. He returned in a more active creative role for season 9 in 2012 before being diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, commonly known as ALS, in 2017. He passed away on November 26, 2018, at the age of 57. The show he created has now run for over 14 seasons, with more than 300 episodes, and has been renewed through season 15. It is one of the longest-running animated series in American television history, and it has generated billions of dollars in merchandise revenue. But none of those numbers explain why SpongeBob matters. To understand that, we need to talk about philosophy. Let us begin with Albert Camus. Camus was born on November 7th, 1913, in Mondovi, French Algeria. He grew up in poverty. His father died in World War I, when Camus was less than a year old, and his mother was illiterate and partially deaf. Despite these circumstances, Camus became one of the most influential philosophers and writers of the 20th century. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1957, and his ideas about the absurd continue to shape how we think about meaning, purpose, and human existence. Camus wrote about a concept he called the absurd. It is important to understand that when Camus used this word, he was not talking about something funny or silly. The absurd in Camus's philosophy refers to a specific tension that exists between 2 fundamental truths. On one side, human beings have a deep, almost desperate need to find meaning and purpose in their lives. We want to believe that our actions matter. We want to believe that there is some grand design, some underlying order to the universe that gives our suffering a reason. On the other side of this tension sits the universe itself, which is completely indifferent. It does not care about us. It does not reward virtue or punish cruelty with any consistency. It offers no answers. It offers no purpose. It simply exists. The absurd is the gap between these two truths. It is the collision between our need for meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it. Most people, when they confront this tension, respond in one of three ways. The first group simply ignores it. They fill their lives with distractions, with work, with entertainment, with routine, and they never allow themselves to sit with the deeper questions. They stay busy so they never have to think about whether any of it matters. The second group turns to what Camus called philosophical suicide. They adopt a belief system, whether religious, political, or ideological, that claims to provide meaning from outside the individual. They surrender their autonomy in exchange for certainty, accepting answers that someone else has provided rather than confronting the question themselves. The third group is crushed by the realization. They look at the meaninglessness and they despair. They see the absurd and they cannot move past it. But Camus proposed a fourth option, and this is where his philosophy becomes truly radical. He said we should acknowledge the absurdity of existence. We should accept it fully, without flinching, without looking away. And then, having accepted it, we should choose to live joyfully anyway. Not because the universe gives us a reason to, not because some external authority has granted us permission, but because we choose to create our own joy, to rebel against meaninglessness by embracing life with full awareness of its futility. This is what Camus meant when he wrote that one must imagine Sisyphus happy. In Greek mythology, Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to push an enormous boulder up a hill for all eternity. Every time he reached the summit, the boulder would roll back down to the bottom, and Sisyphus would have to begin again. It was designed to be the ultimate punishment, infinite, meaningless labor with no possibility of completion or reward. But Camus saw something in that myth that most people miss. He saw freedom, because Sisyphus knows his task is meaningless. He knows the boulder will always roll back down, and yet he pushes it anyway. In that moment of awareness, in that conscious choice to continue despite the futility, Sisyphus transcends his punishment. The struggle itself, Camus wrote, is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Now think about SpongeBob. Really think about his life. Strip away the bright colors and the cartoon physics and the silly sound effects, and look at the structure of his existence. SpongeBob lives in an underwater town where nothing fundamentally changes. He goes to work every single day at a fast food restaurant called the Krusty Krab, where he is paid an absurdly low wage by his employer, Mr. Krabs, who has been shown on multiple occasions to value a single penny more than the well-being of his employees. SpongeBob's job is to stand at a grill and flip hamburger patties for hours on end. The patties he makes today will be consumed today. Tomorrow, he will make more. Nothing accumulates. Nothing progresses. The work is, by any rational standard, Sisyphean. His neighbor, Squidward Tentacles, openly and consistently despises him. His best friend, Patrick Star, while loyal and loving, is not someone who can offer intellectual stimulation or meaningful conversation. The town of Bikini Bottom is regularly destroyed by natural disasters, monster attacks, and various catastrophes, only to be perfectly restored by the beginning of the next episode. There is no lasting consequence. There is no arc of progress. There is only the cycle, and yet, SpongeBob wakes up every single morning with a smile so wide it seems to defy the geometry of his face. He greets his pet snail, Gary, with genuine affection and enthusiasm. He walks to work not with the resigned shuffle of someone who has accepted their fate, but with the energetic bounce of someone who is actively excited about what the day might bring. He flips each Krabby Patty as though it is the first patty he has ever flipped, as though the act of cooking is not a chore, but a craft, a calling, perhaps even an art form. Consider a specific episode. In Band Geeks, which aired on September 7th, 2001, as part of Season 2, Squidward assembles the citizens of Bikini Bottom into a marching band for a performance at the Bubble Bowl. It is, by most accounts, one of the greatest episodes of the entire series. Throughout the episode, everything goes wrong. The band is terrible. The rehearsals are disasters. Squidward's dream of proving himself as a musical leader is collapsing in real time. And then, in the final moments, something extraordinary happens. The band performs, and they are magnificent. Not because Squidward whipped them into shape, not because of any rational or logical process, but because they chose to show up for him. Because SpongeBob rallied them. Because the community decided, collectively, and without obligation, that Squidward's dream mattered. This moment is pure Camus. The boulder reached the top of the hill, not because the universe suddenly decided to be fair, but because a group of absurd characters in an absurd town chose to push together. The meaning was not discovered, it was created. Or consider the episode Pizza Delivery, which aired on August 14th, 1999, as part of Season 1. SpongeBob and Squidward are tasked with delivering a pizza to a customer. The journey is long, dangerous, and absurd. SpongeBob approaches it with total commitment, treating the delivery as a sacred mission. Squidward approaches it with resignation and irritation. When they finally arrive, the customer is rude and aggressive because they forgot his drink. He slams the door in SpongeBob's face, and for one of the few times in the series, SpongeBob is genuinely hurt. He sits on the ground, holding the pizza, and looks devastated. And then Squidward does something remarkable. He takes the pizza, knocks on the customer's door, and shoves it in his face. It is an act of genuine, spontaneous care. Squidward, the character who claims not to care about SpongeBob, who spends most of his time trying to get away from him, steps up and defends him. Not because he has to, not because anyone is watching, but because in that moment, he sees SpongeBob's pain and he cannot look away. There is another episode that illuminates this dynamic with particular clarity. In Frankendoodle, which aired on January 21st, 2002, as part of Season 2, a pencil falls from the surface into Bikini Bottom. SpongeBob discovers that whatever he draws with this pencil comes to life. He draws a crude version of himself, which he names Doodlebob. Doodlebob is SpongeBob without philosophy. He looks like SpongeBob. He moves like SpongeBob. But he has none of SpongeBob's kindness, none of his joy, none of his capacity for connection. Doodlebob is pure impulse, pure aggression, pure chaos. He is what SpongeBob would be if you removed everything that makes SpongeBob SpongeBob and left only the raw, unformed energy. The episode is played for laughs, but the philosophical implications are significant. Doodlebob represents the idea that identity is not given. It is constructed. SpongeBob is not good because he was drawn that way, because some cosmic pencil sketched kindness into his design. He is good because he chooses, moment by moment, to be good. Doodlebob proves that the same basic template can produce something entirely different depending on the choices it makes. Sartre would recognize this immediately. Existence precedes essence. SpongeBob exists first, as a sponge, as a being thrown into Bikini Bottom without instructions. And then, through his choices, he creates his essence. He becomes kind, hardworking, joyful, loyal. These are not traits he was born with. They are achievements. They are the result of thousands of small daily decisions to be a certain kind of being, in a world that would just as easily allow him to be something else. Doodlebob is the reminder. SpongeBob could have been different. The fact that he is who he is not inevitable. It is extraordinary. There is also the episode Chocolate with Nuts, which aired on June 1st, 2002, as part of Season 3. In this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick decide to become door-to-door chocolate salesmen after reading a magazine about how to be successful. The episode is a masterclass in absurdist comedy, as the two of them encounter increasingly bizarre customers, including a man who chases them screaming about chocolate and two con artists who repeatedly trick them into buying things instead of selling things. The episode ends with SpongeBob and Patrick somehow making an enormous amount of money and taking two women on a date. But the success is accidental. It has nothing to do with any strategy or skill. They succeed not because they are good salesmen, but because they are genuine. They believe in their product. They care about their customers. And somehow, in a world that rewards manipulation and cynicism, their sincerity produces results. This is philosophically radical. The episode suggests that authenticity, real, unperformative authenticity, has a power that strategy and calculation cannot replicate. SpongeBob and Patrick do not succeed because they follow the rules of business. They succeed because they are incapable of being anything other than themselves. And in a marketplace full of performers and manipulators, genuine authenticity is so unusual that it becomes irresistible. The philosopher Charles Taylor, in his book The Ethics of Authenticity, argued that modern culture has reduced authenticity to self-expression, to doing your own thing regardless of how it affects others. But Taylor insisted that true authenticity is not narcissism. It is the courageous commitment to being honest about who you are, even when honesty is costly, even when it would be easier to perform a version of yourself that the world finds more acceptable. SpongeBob embodies this deeper authenticity. He does not change himself to fit the situation. He brings himself, his whole self, to every encounter, and he trusts that who he is will be enough. This is what it means to live in an absurd world. The universe does not guarantee justice. The customer was allowed to be cruel. No cosmic force intervened. But Squidward chose to act. He created a moment of meaning in a meaningless situation, and that choice, small and imperfect as it was, mattered. Let us look at one more episode before we continue. In Dying for Pie, which aired on December 28th, 2000, as part of Season 2, Squidward accidentally gives SpongeBob a pie that he believes is a bomb. He is told that when SpongeBob finishes eating it, he will explode. Squidward believes he has killed his neighbor. What follows is one of the most emotionally complex sequences in the show's history. Squidward, believing that SpongeBob has only hours to live, decides to spend the day making SpongeBob happy. They do everything on SpongeBob's checklist of things he wants to do with Squidward. They blow bubbles. They do karate. They watch the sunset together. And during that day, something shifts in Squidward. He stops performing his usual role. He stops pretending not to care. For one day, he allows himself to be fully present with another person, and the result is one of the most beautiful sequences in the entire series. The episode ends with the revelation that the pie was not actually a bomb. SpongeBob is fine, everything is back to normal. And Squidward, of course, immediately retreats behind his walls. He goes back to being annoyed, being indifferent, being Squidward. But we saw him. For one day, we saw who he could be if he stopped being afraid. And that glimpse is enough to change how we see every subsequent interaction between these two characters. Because we know now that Squidward's coldness is not who he is. It is who he has chosen to be. And that distinction, the distinction between essence and choice, is the very foundation of Sartre's existentialism. This is not stupidity. This is not the result of a character who lacks the intelligence to understand his circumstances. SpongeBob has been shown throughout the series to be capable of remarkable insight, creativity, and emotional depth. He understands, on some level, that his life follows a pattern. He knows Squidward does not enjoy his company. He knows Mr. Krabs is not paying him fairly. He is aware of these things, and he chooses joy anyway. This is exactly what Camus was describing. SpongeBob is the absurd hero. He has confronted the repetitive, cyclical, ultimately meaningless structure of his existence. And rather than being crushed by it, rather than distracting himself from it, rather than pretending it is something other than what it is, he has chosen to embrace it. He has decided that the act of living, the act of flipping patties and catching jellyfish and annoying his neighbor is its own reward. SpongeBob does not need a reason to be happy. He does not need validation from Squidward. He does not need a promotion from Mr. Krabs. He does not need the world to change. He has decided, at some fundamental level of his being, that life is worth celebrating exactly as it is. The Krusty Krab is his hill. The spatula is his boulder. And every single day, he pushes that boulder with more joy than most of us bring to any aspect of our lives. Let us now turn our attention to Squidward tentacles. Because if SpongeBob represents one possible response to the absurdity of existence, Squidward represents another. And to understand Squidward, we need to talk about Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre was born on June 21st, 1905, in Paris, France. He became one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century and is widely considered the father of existentialism, at least in its modern, secular form. Sartre's central insight was deceptively simple, but profoundly unsettling. He argued that human beings are, as he famously put it, condemned to be free. What Sartre meant by this is that there is no predetermined human nature. There is no script written for us before we are born. There is no essence that precedes our existence. We are thrown into the world without a manual, without a purpose, and without instructions. We simply exist first, and then we must decide who we are going to be. Every moment of every day, we are making choices, and those choices define us. We cannot escape this freedom. Even choosing not to choose is itself a choice. This radical freedom terrified Sartre, because it means that we are entirely responsible for who we become. We cannot blame God, or fate, or society, or our parents, or our circumstances. If we are unhappy, we have, at least to some degree, chosen to be unhappy. If we are living an unfulfilling life, we are the ones who continue to live it. Sartre developed a concept called bad faith, which is what happens when a person denies their own freedom. Bad faith is a form of self-deception in which an individual pretends that they have no choice. They tell themselves that they are trapped by their circumstances, that they could not possibly live differently, that their unhappiness is the result of external forces beyond their control. But Sartre argued that this is always, at least partially, a lie. We always have more freedom than we admit. Now consider Squidward. Squidward Tentacles is an octopus, despite his name, who lives in an Easter Island head located between SpongeBob's pineapple and Patrick's rock. He works at the Krusty Krab as a cashier, a job he openly hates. He considers himself an artist, a clarinet player of great talent, and a being of refined cultural taste who is tragically surrounded by idiots and Philistines. Squidward's defining characteristic is his misery. He is, with rare exceptions, consistently and thoroughly unhappy. He hates his job. He hates his neighbors. He hates the noise, the chaos, the relentless cheerfulness that surrounds him. He believes, deeply and sincerely, that he deserves a better life. But here's the thing about Squidward that Sartre would immediately recognize. Squidward never leaves. He has had opportunities. In the episode Squidville, which aired on March 6th, 2001, as part of Season 2, Squidward moves to a gated community, populated entirely by other octopuses who share his refined sensibilities. At first, he is thrilled. No SpongeBob, no Patrick, no noise. Just civilized adults engaged in civilized activities. But within days, Squidward becomes bored, then restless. Then, in one of the show's most revealing moments, he begins to behave exactly like SpongeBob, disrupting the community with the same kind of chaotic behavior he claims to hate. In the episode SB129, which aired on December 31st, 1999, as part of Season 1, Squidward accidentally freezes himself and wakes up in a distant future where he is completely alone. There is nothing, no SpongeBob, no one at all. Just Squidward alone in an empty white void with his clarinet. And what happens? He panics. He screams. He desperately begs to be returned to the present, to the very life he claims to despise. This is bad faith. Squidward tells himself that his misery is caused by SpongeBob, by Patrick, by the Krusty Krab, by Bikini Bottom. He believes that if these external irritants were removed, he would finally be happy. But every time they are removed, he discovers that the source of his misery is not external. It is internal. Squidward is afraid of being happy. This sounds paradoxical, but it is one of Sartre's most profound insights. Some people become so identified with their suffering that they cannot imagine themselves without it. If Squidward were to admit that he has the power to be happy, if he were to acknowledge that his circumstances are not what is holding him back, he would have to take responsibility for his own life. He would have to stop blaming SpongeBob and start looking in the mirror. And that is terrifying, because looking in the mirror means confronting the choices you have made. It means admitting that you have been free all along, and that you have used that freedom to build a prison of your own making. SpongeBob and Squidward live on the same street. They work at the same restaurant. Their external circumstances are, for all practical purposes, identical. But one of them is the happiest creature in the ocean, and the other is the most miserable. The difference between them is not their situation. The difference is their philosophy. SpongeBob has chosen joy without requiring a reason. Squidward has refused joy because he is waiting for a reason that will never come. This is perhaps the most profound lesson that SpongeBob SquarePants has to offer. Your happiness is not determined by your circumstances. It is determined by your relationship to those circumstances. Two people can experience the same life and reach entirely different conclusions about its worth. And the variable that separates them is not intelligence, or talent, or luck. It is choice. Let us now turn to Patrick Star. Patrick is SpongeBob's best friend. He is a pink starfish who lives under a rock, literally, in a space that appears to contain nothing but sand, and occasionally a piece of furniture that vanishes between episodes. He has no job. He has no apparent source of income. He has no ambitions, no plans, no goals, and no discernible awareness that any of these things might be expected of him. Most viewers, and most characters within the show, dismiss Patrick as simply unintelligent, and there is certainly evidence for this interpretation. Patrick struggles with basic tasks. He forgets things almost immediately after learning them. He makes decisions that defy not just logic, but basic spatial awareness. But there is another way to look at Patrick Star, one that connects him to a philosophical tradition stretching back thousands of years. In ancient Greece, a school of thought called epicureanism, founded by the philosopher Epicurus around 307 BC, argued that the highest good in life is pleasure, specifically the pleasure that comes from the absence of pain and the presence of tranquility. Epicurus did not advocate for wild indulgence or excess. He believed that the simplest pleasures, friendship, a modest meal, a conversation with someone you care about, were the ones most likely to produce lasting happiness. The key to a good life, Epicurus argued, was to stop wanting things you do not need. Patrick Star is, by this definition, one of the most successful philosophers in Bikini Bottom. He has no possessions, and he does not want any. He has no career, and the absence of one does not trouble him. He has a best friend who loves him unconditionally, and he returns that love without reservation or complication. He eats when he is hungry. He sleeps when he is tired. He plays when the mood strikes him. He does not compare himself to others. He does not worry about the future. He does not ruminate about the past. There is a moment in the episode Big Pink Loser, which aired on November 16th, 2000, as part of Season 2, where Patrick decides he wants to win a trophy, just like SpongeBob. He begins copying everything SpongeBob does. He dresses like SpongeBob. He talks like SpongeBob. He goes to work at the Krusty Krab and tries to do SpongeBob's job. And he fails at all of it, spectacularly. But here is what is interesting. Patrick's failure does not come from incompetence. It comes from imitation. Patrick is perfectly capable of opening a jar, which is the task he is given, but he tries to open it the way SpongeBob would, and that does not work for him. It is only when he stops imitating and starts being himself that he succeeds. This is a surprisingly sophisticated philosophical point. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote extensively about what he called the crowd, the tendency of human beings to lose themselves in the expectations and behaviors of others. When we define ourselves by imitating someone else, when we try to live someone else's life rather than our own, we are not just failing to be authentic. We are failing to exist in any meaningful sense at all. Patrick is happiest when he is being Patrick, not when he is trying to be SpongeBob, or trying to be successful, or trying to be anything other than what he naturally is. And while the show plays this for comedy, there is a genuine philosophical insight hiding beneath the surface. The path to contentment is not to become someone else. It is to become more fully yourself. There is also the question of whether Patrick's simplicity is chosen or imposed. Some philosophers would argue that contentment born of ignorance is not true contentment because it has not been tested. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who was born a slave in the Roman Empire around 50 AD, argued that true freedom is not the absence of challenges, but the ability to maintain inner peace, regardless of external circumstances. By this standard, Patrick's contentment might actually be more impressive than it appears, because Patrick does face challenges. He faces rejection, confusion, and occasional existential terror. And yet he returns, again and again, to a state of basic contentment. His peace is not fragile. It endures. The philosopher John Stuart Mill, writing in the 19th century, posed a famous question about whether it is better to be a satisfied pig or a dissatisfied Socrates. Mill argued that it is better to be the dissatisfied Socrates, that the life of the mind, with all its torments, is superior to the life of simple, unexamined pleasure. But SpongeBob SquarePants seems to challenge this conclusion, because when you look at Squidward, who represents the dissatisfied Socrates in this analogy, and you look at Patrick, who represents the satisfied pig, it is not at all clear that Squidward's life is preferable. Squidward has more awareness, more taste, more intellectual capacity, and he is miserable. Patrick has fewer of these things, and he is content. This does not mean that Patrick is wise in any traditional sense. It means that there might be a form of wisdom in his approach to life that we are too quick to dismiss. The ability to exist in the present moment without anxiety about the future or regret about the past is something that entire spiritual traditions, from Buddhism to Stoicism, have spent centuries trying to teach. Patrick does it naturally, and while his method is not one we can or should try to replicate, the result, genuine contentment without the need for external validation, is something worth examining. Now let us talk about money. Let us talk about Mr. Krabs. Eugene Harold Krabs is the owner and operator of the Krusty Krab restaurant. He is, without exaggeration, one of the most honest depictions of capitalist philosophy ever created for a general audience. And the philosophical framework that best illuminates his character is not Marx, although Marx is relevant, but rather the rational egoism of Ayn Rand. Rand, who was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, in 1905 and immigrated to the United States in 1926, developed a philosophical system she called objectivism. At the center of this system was the idea that rational self-interest is the proper moral purpose of every human being. According to Rand, selfishness is not a vice, it is a virtue. The individual who pursues their own happiness without apology, who refuses to sacrifice their interests for the sake of others, who treats their own life as the highest value. This individual is, in Rand's view, morally superior to the person who lives for others. Mr. Krabs is this philosophy made flesh, or rather, made crustacean. He pursues money with a single-minded devotion that borders on the religious. He pays his employees as little as possible. He charges his customers as much as the market will bear. He has been shown, across hundreds of episodes, to prioritize profit over safety, over kindness, over friendship, and in some cases, over basic decency. And yet the show does not simply condemn him. That is what makes Mr. Krabs such a fascinating character, because alongside his greed, we see moments of genuine love, particularly for his daughter, Pearl. We see moments of vulnerability, usually connected to his past as a Navy veteran and his childhood in poverty. We see a character who is driven not just by avarice, but by fear, the deep, persistent fear that without money, he will be nothing, that without the security that wealth provides, he will return to the powerlessness of his youth. The philosopher Erich Fromm, writing in the mid-20th century, described two fundamental modes of human existence, the having mode and the being mode. In the having mode, a person's identity is defined by their possessions. Their sense of self is attached to what they own, what they control, what they can accumulate. Take these things away, and they experience not just loss, but an existential crisis, because without their possessions, they do not know who they are. In the being mode, a person's identity is defined by who they are rather than what they have. Their relationships, their values, their capacity for love and creativity and growth, these are the things that make them who they are. And because these things cannot be confiscated or stolen or lost in a stock market crash, the person who lives in the being mode has a stability and a security that no amount of money can provide. Mr. Krabs is trapped in the having mode. His identity is so thoroughly enmeshed with his wealth that the prospect of losing even a single penny triggers genuine distress. SpongeBob, by contrast, lives almost entirely in the being mode. His sense of self is not attached to his possessions or his bank account. It is attached to his relationships, to his craft, to his capacity for joy. And this is why SpongeBob is fundamentally more secure than Mr. Krabs, despite having far less money. SpongeBob's sense of self cannot be taken from him because it is not located in anything external. There is a particular irony in the fact that SpongeBob works for Mr. Krabs. Here you have two characters who interact every single day, who operate within the same economic system, and who have arrived at diametrically opposed philosophical conclusions about what matters in life. Mr. Krabs has spent his entire career accumulating money, and it has not made him happy. SpongeBob has spent his entire career flipping patties, and he is one of the most content beings in the ocean. The system that Mr. Krabs has built, the Krusty Krab, with its exploitative wages and its relentless focus on profit, is supposed to serve his interests. But it is SpongeBob, the underpaid, overworked fry cook, who actually benefits from it, because SpongeBob has found something in the work itself that transcends the transaction. Let us move on to Sandy Cheeks. Sandra Jennifer Cheeks is a squirrel from Houston, Texas, who lives underwater in a pressurized air dome known as the Tree Dome. She is a scientist, an inventor, a martial arts expert, and in many ways, the most rational character in the entire show. There is an episode called Graveyard Shift, which aired on September 6th, 2002, as part of Season 2, where Mr. Krabs decides to keep the Krusty Krab open 24 hours a day. His reasoning is simple. More hours means more revenue. The well-being of his employees, their need for rest, their right to a life outside of work. None of these considerations even enter his calculation. People exist, in Mr. Krabs' worldview, to generate profit. Everything else is a distraction. But the episode takes an interesting turn. SpongeBob and Squidward, left alone in the restaurant overnight, begin telling ghost stories. They scare each other. They scare themselves. The darkness, both literal and metaphorical, closes in. And in that darkness, stripped of their usual roles, something authentic emerges between them. They are afraid together. And being afraid together is, in its own strange way, a form of intimacy. Mr. Krabs created the conditions for this experience by extending the workday for profit. He did not intend to create a meaningful human connection, but meaning emerged anyway, not because of the system, but in spite of it. This happens more often in life than we tend to acknowledge. The structures we build to pursue money, power, and efficiency often create, as an unintended byproduct, the very conditions for genuine human experience. There is a term in economics called an externality, which refers to a consequence of an economic activity that affects parties who did not choose to be involved. Pollution is a negative externality. Mr. Krabs' graveyard shift created a positive externality. By keeping SpongeBob and Squidward at work all night, he accidentally gave them an experience that deepened their relationship. The capitalist system, designed to extract labor, inadvertently produced meaning. And that, in a nutshell, is the paradox of Mr. Krabs. He is not a villain. He is a mechanism. He is the invisible hand of the market made visible. And like the market itself, he produces outcomes that are sometimes harmful, sometimes beneficial, and almost always unintended. Sandy represents something specific in the philosophical landscape of Bikini Bottom. She represents the Enlightenment, the philosophical movement that emerged in 17th and 18th century Europe, championed by thinkers like John Locke, Isaac Newton, Voltaire, and Immanuel Kant, was built on a single foundational belief, that through the application of reason, observation, and the scientific method, human beings can understand the world and improve their condition within it. Sandy approaches every problem with this mindset. When she encounters something she does not understand, she studies it. When she faces a challenge, she engineers a solution. When others resort to panic or magical thinking, Sandy turns to data, hypothesis, and experimentation. But the show also reveals the limitations of pure rationalism And this is where Sandy's character becomes philosophically interesting. Because Bikini Bottom does not operate according to rational principles. It is a world where fire can burn underwater, where a squirrel can be friends with a sponge, where the laws of physics are suggestions rather than rules. Sandy's rational framework, while powerful and often effective, cannot fully account for the reality in which she lives. The Scottish philosopher David Hume, writing in the 18th century, argued that reason alone cannot motivate human action. We need emotion. We need passion. We need desire. Reason can tell us how to achieve our goals, but it cannot tell us what our goals should be. For that, we need something that lies beyond the reach of logic. Sandy has the reason. SpongeBob has the passion. And the show seems to suggest that both are necessary for a complete life. Neither pure rationality nor pure emotion is sufficient on its own. The best outcomes in Bikini Bottom tend to occur when Sandy's analytical mind is combined with SpongeBob's emotional intuition, when head and heart work together. Consider the episode Pressure, which aired on March 8th, 2001, as part of Season 2. In this episode, Sandy and the sea creatures get into an argument about whether land creatures or sea creatures are superior. Sandy insists that land creatures are better, and the others disagree. They challenge each other to survive in each other's environments. The episode ends with both sides nearly dying. Sandy cannot breathe underwater without her helmet, and the sea creatures cannot survive on land for more than a few moments. The conclusion is not that one side is right. The conclusion is that neither side can survive without adapting to the other's reality. This is what the philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel described as dialectical synthesis. Hegel argued that intellectual progress occurs through a three-part process. First, there is a thesis, an initial position. Then, there is an antithesis, an opposing position. And finally, through the conflict between these two positions, a synthesis emerges, a new understanding that incorporates the truth from both sides while transcending their limitations. Sandy's rationalism is the thesis. SpongeBob's emotional spontaneity is the antithesis. And the synthesis, the philosophical resolution that the show offers again and again, is that the best life combines both. You need reason to navigate the world, but you need emotion to make the world worth navigating. There is also the matter of Sandy's choice to live in Bikini Bottom in the first place. Sandy chose to leave her home in Texas, her natural environment, to live in a place where she literally cannot breathe without technological assistance. She lives inside a glass dome, separated from the world around her by an invisible barrier that keeps her alive, but also keeps her apart. This is a profound metaphor for the immigrant experience, for the experience of anyone who has chosen to leave the familiar behind in pursuit of something new. Sandy is simultaneously part of Bikini Bottom and separate from it. She participates in its culture, has friends there, contributes to its community. But she will never fully belong. The dome will always be between her and the world outside. The existentialist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wrote about the concept of the other, the person who exists outside the dominant group, who is seen as different, who must constantly negotiate between their authentic self and the expectations of the culture in which they live. Sandy is this other in Bikini Bottom, and her response to her otherness is not to hide it or deny it. She embraces it. She is a squirrel. She is from Texas. She is a scientist. These things make her different, and she refuses to pretend otherwise. In this way, Sandy is perhaps the most authentically existential character in the show. She has made a deliberate choice about how to live. She accepts the costs of that choice, the dome, the isolation, the cultural disconnection. And she finds meaning not in spite of these difficulties, but through them. Let us pause here and consider something that we have not yet discussed directly. The question of evil. Because SpongeBob SquarePants, for all its warmth and humor, does not shy away from darkness. There are episodes in the series that are genuinely unsettling. Episodes where characters are placed in situations that would be terrifying if they occurred in real life. Episodes where the animation becomes distorted, where the humor gives way to something closer to horror, where the bright, safe world of Bikini Bottom reveals edges that are sharp enough to cut. The episode Graveyard Shift, which we discussed earlier, uses genuine horror techniques, building suspense, creating dread, and playing on primal fears of darkness and the unknown. The episode Rock Bottom, which aired on March 15th, 2000, as part of Season 1, places SpongeBob in a strange, dark city at the bottom of a trench where the inhabitants speak a language he cannot understand, and the buses operate according to rules that seem designed to trap him. The episode Squid's Visit, which aired on June 5th, 2009, as part of Season 6, features SpongeBob recreating the interior of Squidward's house inside his own pineapple, down to the smallest detail, in a sequence that is genuinely disturbing in its implications about obsession and boundary violation. These episodes serve an important philosophical function. They remind us that joy does not exist in a vacuum. SpongeBob's happiness is meaningful precisely because it exists alongside the possibility of fear, of suffering, of genuine danger. If Bikini Bottom were a paradise with no darkness at all, SpongeBob's optimism would be trivial. It would be easy to be happy in a world with no challenges. But Bikini Bottom has darkness. It has danger. It has the potential for real suffering. And SpongeBob chooses joy in spite of this, not because of the absence of darkness, but in its presence. The philosopher Reinhold Niebuhr, who is perhaps best known for composing the Serenity Prayer, wrote about what he called the irony of American history, the way in which nations and individuals who believe themselves to be innocent are often complicit in systems of harm they do not recognize. Niebuhr argued that true goodness requires an awareness of one's own capacity for evil. A person who believes they are incapable of doing wrong is not virtuous. They are naive. Virtue requires the knowledge that you could do harm and the conscious choice not to. SpongeBob has this knowledge, or at least the show does. It acknowledges that its protagonist exists in a world where harm is possible, where cruelty exists, where suffering is real. And it argues, through episode after episode, that the appropriate response to this reality is not withdrawal, not cynicism, not fortress building, but engagement. Warm, open, vulnerable engagement with a world that might hurt you. This is not passive acceptance. This is courage. The courage to remain open in a world that gives you every reason to close down. The courage to trust in a world that regularly betrays trust. The courage to keep caring in a world that does not always care back. The philosopher Cornel West has spoken about what he calls tragicomic hope, the ability to maintain hope while being fully aware of the tragic dimensions of human existence. This is not naive optimism. It is not the belief that everything will work out fine. It is the decision to hope anyway, to love anyway, to create anyway, knowing full well that the world may respond with indifference or cruelty. SpongeBob embodies tragicomic hope. He hopes in a world that does not guarantee happy endings. He loves in a world where love is not always returned. He creates his patties, his bubbles, his friendship, in a world where creation is always followed by dissolution. And he does this not because he does not understand the tragedy. He does it because he has decided that hope is more interesting than despair, that love is more valuable than self-protection, that the risk of being hurt is worth the possibility of connection. Let us also think about what SpongeBob teaches us about failure. Because SpongeBob fails constantly. He fails his driving test, over and over, across dozens of episodes. He fails to impress Squidward. He fails to earn a fair wage. He fails to maintain his composure in moments of stress. He is, by many conventional measures, a failure. And yet failure never defines him. This is perhaps his most radical quality. In a culture that is terrified of failure, that treats every setback as a reflection of personal worth, that equates success with value and failure with shame, SpongeBob demonstrates an entirely different relationship with failure. He fails, he feels the sting of it, and then he moves on. He does not construct elaborate narratives about what his failure means. He does not use failure as evidence that he is not good enough. He simply tries again. The psychologist Carol Dweck has written about what she calls the growth mindset, the belief that abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. People with a growth mindset see failure not as evidence of unintelligence, but as a springboard for growth. They are resilient, persistent, and willing to take risks because they do not view failure as a final verdict on their character. SpongeBob has the purest growth mindset of any character in fiction. He has failed his driving test, by some counts, more than 1,000 times across the series. And he shows up for the next test with the same enthusiasm as the first. This is not insanity, despite the famous quote about repeating the same action and expecting different results. This is something deeper. It is the belief that the process matters more than the outcome, that the act of trying is its own reward, that failure is not the opposite of success, but part of the path toward it. There is a Japanese concept called wabi-sabi, which finds beauty in imperfection, incompleteness, and transience. A cracked bowl is not ruined. It is more beautiful because of its cracks. A fleeting moment is not less valuable because it will end. It is more valuable because of its impermanence. SpongeBob's failures are his cracks. They are what make him real, what make him relatable, what make his joy credible rather than forced. A character who never failed would be boring and unbelievable. A character who fails and keeps going, who treats each failure as a minor inconvenience rather than an existential crisis. That character has something to teach us. There is one more character worth examining, and he is perhaps the easiest to overlook. Gary the Snail. Gary communicates almost exclusively through a single vocalization, meow, and yet somehow he manages to express more genuine emotional truth than almost any other character in the show. He is SpongeBob's pet, his companion, his confidant, and the relationship between SpongeBob and Gary is, philosophically speaking, one of the purest forms of connection the show has to offer. The philosopher Martin Buber, writing in the early 20th century, described two fundamental ways of relating to another being. The first, which he called the I-it relationship, treats the other as an object, something to be used, evaluated, categorized, and discarded when no longer useful. Most human relationships, Buber argued, operate in this mode most of the time. We treat people as means to our ends. We evaluate them based on what they can do for us. We relate to them through the lens of utility rather than genuine encounter. The second mode, which Buber called the I-thou relationship, is fundamentally different. In an I-thou relationship, you encounter the other being as a complete subject, as a genuine other who exists independently of your needs and desires. You do not evaluate them. You do not use them. You simply meet them, wholly and without reservation, in the space between you. SpongeBob's relationship with Gary is the closest thing in the show to a pure I-thou encounter. There is no transaction between them. Gary does not perform tasks for SpongeBob, at least not willingly. SpongeBob does not keep Gary because Gary serves some practical function. They simply share a life, and in the sharing of that life, something meaningful emerges. In a show full of characters driven by ambition, fear, greed, and ego, Gary serves as a quiet reminder that sometimes the most meaningful thing we can offer another being is simply our presence. No agenda, no expectation, just the willingness to be there. Let us step back now and look at Bikini Bottom itself, because the setting of SpongeBob SquarePants is not just a backdrop. It is a philosophical laboratory. Bikini Bottom is a town at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, populated by sea creatures who have somehow developed a civilization that mirrors human society in almost every detail. There are houses, and restaurants, and schools, and jails. There is a government, a police force, a system of commerce, and a media landscape. All the structures and institutions of human civilization have been replicated here, at the bottom of the sea, by creatures who are decidedly not human. The name Bikini Bottom itself carries a weight that most viewers never consider. Bikini Atoll is a real place. It is a coral reef in the Marshall Islands, in the Central Pacific Ocean. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States government detonated 23 nuclear weapons at Bikini Atoll as part of its nuclear testing program. The tests displaced the indigenous Bikinian people, irradiated the land and water, and rendered the atoll uninhabitable for decades. Stephen Hillenburg, a marine biologist by training, would have known this. The name Bikini Bottom is not an accident. It places the show's entire world in the shadow of nuclear catastrophe. The cheerful, colorful town where SpongeBob lives and works sits at the bottom of an ocean that was once used as a testing ground for weapons capable of ending civilization. This is a remarkable creative choice. It means that beneath the comedy, beneath the bright colors and the silly voices and the children's entertainment, there is an awareness of destruction. Bikini Bottom exists in a place where humanity demonstrated its capacity for annihilation. And yet life persists. Not human life, but life nonetheless. Sponges and starfish and squid and crabs have built a civilization in the ruins of human recklessness. There is a philosophical reading of this that is both beautiful and devastating. It suggests that life is stronger than the forces that seek to destroy it. That even in a place scarred by nuclear testing, communities can form, friendships can bloom, and a small yellow sponge can wake up happy every morning. The show does not ignore the darkness. It places itself directly in the middle of it and then insists on joy. This is what Camus meant by revolt. Not political revolt, not armed resistance, but the spiritual revolt of choosing to affirm life in the face of everything that would deny it. SpongeBob's happiness is an act of defiance. It is a refusal to let the shadow of Bikini Atoll define the terms of existence. The bombs fell, the radiation spread, and a sponge and a pineapple decided to be happy anyway. This is significant because it allows the show to examine fundamental questions about human nature without the baggage of human identity. Race, nationality, physical appearance in the traditional sense, these categories do not exist in Bikini Bottom. What remains are the underlying philosophical questions. How should we organize a society? What do we owe each other? What constitutes a good life? Is there an inherent human, or in this case oceanic, nature? Or are we defined entirely by our choices? And the answer that Bikini Bottom provides, again and again across hundreds of episodes, is that community matters, despite their differences, despite their conflicts, despite the fact that Squidward would probably relocate to the moon if he could. The citizens of Bikini Bottom show up for each other. They rebuild after every catastrophe. They celebrate together. They grieve together. The town endures not because of any individual, but because of the collective commitment of its residents to the idea that they are, for better or worse, in this together. This is not a naive or simplistic conclusion. It is the conclusion that philosophers from Aristotle to Buber to the present day have arrived at through centuries of careful thought, that human beings are fundamentally social creatures, that we need each other not just for survival, but for meaning, that the good life, whatever form it takes, is always lived in relation to others. And then there is the Krabby Patty. The Krabby Patty is the most important object in SpongeBob SquarePants. Wars have been fought over it. Empires have been built on it. One character, Sheldon J. Plankton, has dedicated his entire existence to stealing its secret formula. It is the economic engine of Bikini Bottom, the source of Mr. Krabs' wealth, and the object of SpongeBob's deepest professional devotion. But what is the Krabby Patty, really? It is a hamburger. It is a simple, ordinary, unremarkable thing. A bun, a patty, some toppings, some sauce. There is nothing inherently special about it, and yet it carries enormous meaning for every character in the show. For SpongeBob, the Krabby Patty represents purpose. It is his craft, his calling, his medium of expression. When SpongeBob flips a patty, he is not performing a task. He is creating something. He brings the same care and attention to each individual patty that an artist brings to a painting or a musician brings to a performance. For Mr. Krabs, the Krabby Patty represents wealth and security. It is the product that generates the revenue, that fills the safe, that quiets the fear. For Plankton, the Krabby Patty represents everything he does not have. It is the embodiment of his failure, his inadequacy, his inability to compete. For the customers of the Krusty Krab, The Krabby Patty represents comfort, familiarity, reliability. It is the thing they can count on. In an unpredictable world, the same object, different meanings, different philosophies. This is what the phenomenologists, philosophers like Edmund Husserl and Maurice Merleau-Ponty, meant when they talked about intentionality. Objects do not have inherent meaning. They are not carrying around little packets of significance that we simply discover. We project meaning onto them based on our consciousness, our history, our desires, our fears. The Krabby Patty is not just a patty. It is a mirror. And what each character sees in that mirror reveals more about them than any dialogue ever could. There is a topic we have not yet addressed that runs through every episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, whether we notice it or not. That topic is work. Work is central to SpongeBob's identity in a way that most fictional characters do not experience. When SpongeBob talks about flipping patties, he is not just describing a job. He is describing who he is. His work is not something he does between the parts of life that matter. It is the part that matters most. The Krusty Krab is not just his employer. It is his stage, his gallery, his temple. The German philosopher Karl Marx wrote extensively about a concept he called alienation. Marx argued that in a capitalist system, workers become alienated from their labor. They do not own what they produce. They do not control how they produce it. And over time, they lose any sense of connection between themselves and the work they do. The job becomes a means to an end, a way to earn money, and the work itself becomes meaningless. But SpongeBob is not alienated. This is one of the most remarkable things about his character. Despite working in exactly the kind of capitalist system that Marx warned about, despite being paid poorly, despite having no ownership stake in the Krusty Krab, despite Mr. Krabs extracting all the surplus value from his labor, SpongeBob finds genuine meaning in the work itself. How? By treating it as a craft. The philosopher Richard Sennett, in his book The Craftsman, argued that human beings have a deep, fundamental need to do things well for their own sake. The craftsman does not build a chair well because someone is paying him to. He builds it well because building it well is intrinsically satisfying. The quality of the work is its own reward. SpongeBob is a craftsman. Each Krabby Patty is not just food. It is an expression of care, attention, and skill. He does not flip patties well because Mr. Krabs demands it. He flips them well because flipping them well matters to him. And in this commitment to craft, SpongeBob escapes the alienation that Marx predicted. He has found meaning in labor itself, not in what labor produces or what labor pays. This is a radical idea, especially in our current moment. We live in a culture that values output, productivity, and efficiency above all else. We measure the worth of work by its results, by the salary it commands, by the status it confers. SpongeBob challenges all of this. He suggests that work can be meaningful regardless of its economic value, that a fry cook who loves his craft is living a more philosophically complete life than a CEO who despises his job but earns $1 million. The Japanese concept of ikigai, which roughly translates to a reason for being, describes the intersection of 4 elements: what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. When all 4 overlap, you have found your ikigai. SpongeBob has found his. He loves making Krabby Patties. He is extraordinarily good at it. The world, or at least Bikini Bottom, needs them, and he gets paid for it, however poorly. Most people never find their ikigai. They find 1 or 2 of the 4 elements, but not all 4. They love something, but cannot make money from it. They are good at something, but do not love it. SpongeBob has achieved what most humans spend their entire lives searching for, and he found it at a fast food grill at the bottom of the ocean. Let us also consider how SpongeBob deals with failure and loss, because no discussion of philosophy is complete without confronting the question of suffering. In the episode Have You Seen This Snail?, which aired on November 11th, 2005 as part of Season 4, Gary runs away from home because SpongeBob has been neglecting him. SpongeBob searches desperately for his pet, putting up posters, asking everyone he knows, wandering the streets of Bikini Bottom in visible emotional distress. This episode is, for a children's show, remarkably honest about grief. SpongeBob does not quickly recover. He does not shrug off the loss and move on. He sits with it. He feels it fully. And when he eventually finds Gary and they are reunited, the relief is palpable because the suffering that preceded it was genuine. The Buddhist concept of dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately understood as the inherent unsatisfactoriness of existence, teaches that suffering is not an aberration. It is a fundamental feature of being alive. The Buddhist response to this truth is not to avoid suffering, but to develop the capacity to be present with it, to experience it without being destroyed by it. SpongeBob does this naturally. He feels pain deeply, but he does not become stuck in it. He grieves, but he does not become grief. He has a remarkable ability to move through difficult emotions without suppressing them and without being consumed by them. This emotional flexibility is, in psychological terms, what researchers call resilience, and it is far rarer and far more valuable than simple happiness. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about what he called amor fati, the love of fate. Nietzsche argued that a truly strong individual does not merely accept what happens to them. They love it. They embrace every experience, including suffering, as a necessary part of their existence. They would not change a single moment of their life, because every moment, including the painful ones, has contributed to who they are. SpongeBob embodies amor fati. He does not wish he had a different job, different neighbors, or a different life. He does not fantasize about escaping Bikini Bottom. He loves his fate. He loves the Krusty Krab. He loves Squidward. He loves Gary. He loves Patrick. He loves jellyfishing. And he loves Krabby Patties. Not because these things are perfect, but because they are his. And that, more than anything else, is why SpongeBob is happy. Not because his life is good, by any external standard, but because he has decided, fully and without reservation, that his life is his, and that it is worth loving. Before we begin to bring everything together, there is one more character who deserves our attention. One who, in many ways, embodies a philosophy just as extreme as Mr. Krabs's, but pointed in an entirely different direction. That character is Sheldon J. Plankton. Plankton is the owner of the Chum Bucket, a failing restaurant located directly across the street from the Krusty Krab. He is married to a sentient computer named Karen, and he has dedicated the entirety of his professional life to a single goal: stealing the Krabby Patty secret formula. Plankton has attempted to steal this formula hundreds of times across the run of the series. He has used disguises, robots, mind control devices, appeals to sympathy, outright theft, manipulation, negotiation, and every conceivable strategy in between. He has failed every single time, and yet he never stops trying. From a certain angle, Plankton is tragic. He is the embodiment of a particular kind of modern suffering, the suffering of the person who has defined themselves entirely by a goal they cannot achieve. Plankton does not want the formula because he enjoys cooking. He does not want it because he loves food. He wants it because he has convinced himself that obtaining it will finally make him successful, respected, and complete. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, writing in the 19th century, described what he called the sickness unto death, which he identified as despair. But Kierkegaard's understanding of despair was not the common one. He did not mean sadness or hopelessness in the ordinary sense. He meant the state of being in which a person fails to become who they truly are, the despair of not being oneself. Plankton is in this kind of despair. He has spent so long pursuing the formula that he has forgotten, if he ever knew, who he actually is apart from that pursuit. The formula has become his identity. Without it, without the quest for it, Plankton would have to confront a terrifying question. If I am not the one who is trying to steal the formula, then who am I? This is why Plankton cannot stop. It is not really about the formula anymore. It is about avoiding the void that would open up if he stopped chasing it. The pursuit has become the purpose. And the irony, the deep Camus-level irony, is that Plankton is also a version of Sisyphus. He too is pushing a boulder up a hill, watching it roll back down, and starting again. The difference between Plankton and SpongeBob is not in the structure of their lives. It is in their relationship to the repetition. SpongeBob finds joy in his cycle. Plankton finds only frustration and bitterness. And then there is Mrs. Puff. Mrs. Puff is SpongeBob's driving instructor. She runs a boating school, the undersea equivalent of a driving school, and she has been trying to teach SpongeBob how to drive for as long as the show has been on the air. SpongeBob is, by any measure, the worst driver in the history of Bikini Bottom. He has destroyed Mrs. Puff's school, her car, her nerves, and in several episodes, her freedom, as she has been sent to prison for the damage caused by his incompetence. Mrs. Puff is fascinating from a philosophical perspective because she represents the problem of institutional obligation. She is trapped not by chains or bars, but by a system. She is a teacher. Her job is to teach. SpongeBob is her student. Her obligation is to help him learn. But SpongeBob will never learn to drive. The evidence is overwhelming and conclusive. No amount of patience, no alternative method, no creative approach will ever change this fundamental fact. And yet the system demands that she continue. She cannot expel him. She cannot refuse to teach him. She is bound by her role, by her profession, by the institutional framework in which she operates, to keep trying something that she knows, with absolute certainty, will never work. The philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote about what she called the banality of evil, the way in which ordinary people, operating within ordinary institutional structures, can participate in terrible outcomes simply by following the rules, by doing their jobs, by not asking whether the system itself might be the problem. Mrs. Puff is not evil. She is not malicious. She genuinely wants to help SpongeBob. But she is trapped in a system that produces suffering, and her adherence to that system, her inability or unwillingness to step outside it, makes her complicit in her own misery. Mrs. Puff is what happens when you follow the rules, even when the rules do not make sense. She is the philosophical counterpart to SpongeBob's joyful rebellion. SpongeBob ignores the rules when they do not serve him, not out of malice, but out of an instinctive understanding that rules are tools, not masters. Mrs. Puff follows the rules religiously, even when they are actively destroying her life. And the show asks us, quietly but persistently, which approach is actually more rational? There is something else worth exploring, and it is not a character, but a relationship. The relationship between SpongeBob and Squidward. On the surface, this is a simple comedic dynamic. SpongeBob is annoying. Squidward is annoyed. That is the joke, repeated in countless variations across hundreds of episodes. But beneath the surface, there is something far more complex happening. SpongeBob loves Squidward. This is stated explicitly and demonstrated repeatedly throughout the series. SpongeBob considers Squidward one of his closest friends. He admires Squidward's artistic abilities. He respects Squidward's intelligence. He genuinely, sincerely believes that Squidward is a wonderful person who deserves to be happy. Squidward does not reciprocate this feeling, or rather, he will not allow himself to reciprocate it. There are moments throughout the series, small, quiet moments that are easy to miss, where Squidward shows genuine concern for SpongeBob, genuine sadness at the possibility of losing him, genuine warmth that breaks through his carefully maintained shell of indifference. But these moments are always brief. Squidward always retreats back behind his defenses, back into his identity as the misunderstood artist surrounded by idiots. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote about what he called the face of the other. Levinas argued that genuine ethical life begins not with abstract principles or philosophical systems, but with the direct, unmediated encounter with another person. When you truly see another person, when you encounter their face and recognize them as a being who exists independently of you, who has their own suffering and joy and fear and hope, you are called into ethical responsibility. You cannot simply ignore them. You cannot treat them as an object. Their existence makes demands on you. SpongeBob sees Squidward's face. He encounters Squidward as a genuine other, a being worthy of love and attention and care. And Squidward, despite his best efforts, sometimes sees SpongeBob's face too. In those moments, the comedy falls away and something raw and honest emerges. Two beings who are fundamentally different, who approach life in completely opposite ways, who should by all logic have nothing to offer each other, but who are, despite everything, connected. This is not just a cartoon dynamic. This is a portrait of how relationships actually work. We do not choose the people who end up in our lives. We do not get to select neighbors who share our values and aesthetics. We are thrown together, often with people who irritate us, challenge us, and force us to confront aspects of ourselves we would rather ignore. And the question that SpongeBob and Squidward's relationship poses is not whether we can learn to like these people, but whether we can learn to love them anyway. Whether we can offer genuine care to someone who does not want it, does not ask for it, and may never return it. SpongeBob's answer is yes. Always yes. And that, perhaps more than any philosophical system, is the show's deepest truth. Let us sit with this idea for a moment longer, because it connects to something that the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote about more than 2,000 years ago. Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, argued that friendship is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Without friends, Aristotle wrote, no one would choose to live, even if they possessed every other good. Wealth without friendship is meaningless. Power without friendship is empty. Even wisdom, without someone to share it with, becomes a burden rather than a blessing. Aristotle identified 3 types of friendship. The first is friendship of utility, where 2 people are connected because they are useful to each other. Business partners, colleagues, people who maintain a relationship because it serves a practical purpose. The second is friendship of pleasure, where 2 people are connected because they enjoy each other's company. Drinking buddies, people who share hobbies or activities, but whose connection does not extend beyond those shared pleasures. The third and highest type of friendship is what Aristotle called friendship of virtue. This is the friendship between 2 people who genuinely wish the best for each other, not because of what they can get from the relationship, but because they recognize and admire the goodness in the other person. This type of friendship, Aristotle argued, is rare, deep, and enduring. It is the foundation of a good life. SpongeBob and Patrick have a friendship of virtue. It is easy to dismiss their relationship as simple or childish, but look at what it actually contains. Patrick does not befriend SpongeBob because SpongeBob is useful to him. SpongeBob does not befriend Patrick because Patrick makes him look good. They are friends because they genuinely, unconditionally care about each other's well-being. When Patrick is sad, SpongeBob feels it. When SpongeBob is in danger, Patrick acts without thinking. There is no calculation in their friendship, no ledger of favors given and received, no expectation of return. This is vanishingly rare in fiction, and even rarer in life. Most friendships, if we are honest, contain at least some element of utility or pleasure. We are drawn to people who make us feel good, who enhance our status, who fill a particular role in our social lives. SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship has none of this. It is pure, and in its purity, it demonstrates something that Aristotle knew, but that our culture has largely forgotten. That the highest form of human connection is not romantic love, not family obligation, not professional networking, but genuine, freely chosen friendship between 2 people who want nothing from each other except to exist in each other's presence. There is also the question of laughter. SpongeBob is, first and foremost, a comedy, and we should not overlook the philosophical significance of humor itself. The philosopher Henri Bergson, writing in the early 20th century, argued that laughter serves a social function. We laugh, Bergson said, when we observe something mechanical in something living. When a person behaves like a machine, when they are rigid, repetitive, or unable to adapt to changing circumstances, we find it funny. Laughter, in this view, is a corrective. It is society's way of pointing out inflexibility and encouraging adaptation. But SpongeBob suggests a different theory of laughter. In Bikini Bottom, the funniest moments are often not about rigidity, but about freedom. SpongeBob's humor comes not from his inability to adapt, but from his excess of adaptability. He is too flexible, too open, too willing to go along with whatever absurdity the moment presents. His laughter, and the laughter he generates in the audience, is not a corrective. It is a celebration. It celebrates the capacity of the living to be unpredictable, spontaneous, and free. The existentialist philosopher Gabriel Marcel described what he called a spirit of availability, the capacity to be fully present and open to whatever life brings. SpongeBob has this spirit in abundance. He is available to every experience, every emotion, every relationship, every Krabby Patty, and his humor flows from this availability. He is funny because he is free, and he is free because he has refused to take the world's seriousness at face value. This is perhaps the most subversive thing about SpongeBob SquarePants. In a world that rewards seriousness, that treats gravity and solemnity as signs of maturity and intelligence, SpongeBob insists that joy is not a sign of ignorance, that laughter is not a failure to understand, that the person who can find humor in the absurdity of existence is not less wise than the person who can only find despair. They may, in fact, be wiser. Camus, whom we discussed at the beginning, understood this. In his novel The Stranger, the character Meursault, who is often read as cold and detached, has moments of extraordinary sensory pleasure. He notices the heat of the sun, the feel of the water, the taste of coffee. These moments are not profound in any traditional sense. They are simple, physical, immediate, but they are real. And in a novel about a man condemned to death for a crime committed without passion, these small moments of genuine experience are the closest thing to meaning that the story offers. SpongeBob's joy works the same way. It is not philosophical in the academic sense. It is not the product of careful reasoning or systematic thought. It is immediate, physical, sensory. The feeling of a perfectly formed patty, the thrill of catching a jellyfish, the simple pleasure of walking to work on a sunny day. These are not grand meanings. They are small ones, but they are real. And in a universe that offers no grand meanings, the small ones might be all we have. And maybe that is enough. Let us talk about one more thing before we close. Let us talk about water. It is easy to forget, while watching SpongeBob SquarePants, that the entire show takes place underwater. The characters walk rather than swim. They have fires and campfires and baths. They cry tears that are indistinguishable from the water that surrounds them. The show makes almost no effort to maintain the illusion of an aquatic environment, and this is often played for laughs, as in the famous gag where a character lights a campfire underwater, and another character asks how that is possible, only for the fire to immediately extinguish. But there is a philosophical reading of this that is worth considering. The water in SpongeBob is invisible. The characters are surrounded by it at all times. They breathe it, move through it, and live within it, but they never acknowledge it. It is so ubiquitous, so constant, so fundamentally a part of their existence, that it has become invisible. The writer David Foster Wallace, in his famous commencement address at Kenyon College in 2005, told a brief story about two young fish swimming along who happened to meet an older fish swimming the other way. The older fish nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How is the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then one of them looks over at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" Wallace's point was that the most obvious, most important realities are often the hardest to see. We are all swimming through water of one kind or another, through cultural assumptions, through unexamined beliefs, through habits of thought so deeply ingrained that we do not even recognize them as habits. The challenge of adult life, Wallace argued, is to remain conscious, to choose what to pay attention to resist the default setting of self-centered obliviousness, and to notice the water. The citizens of Bikini Bottom live in water and do not see it. We live in our own version of water, our own invisible medium of assumptions and habits and unquestioned beliefs, and most of the time, we do not see it either. But SpongeBob might. There are moments in the show where SpongeBob seems to perceive something that the other characters do not. Not anything mystical or supernatural, but a kind of heightened awareness of the present moment, an appreciation for the texture and detail of everyday life that borders on the spiritual. When SpongeBob makes a Krabby Patty, he is not just going through the motions. He is present. He is aware. He is, in Wallace's terms, choosing what to pay attention to. There is one more dimension of SpongeBob SquarePants that we need to explore, and it sits beneath everything else we have discussed tonight, like a foundation that is only visible when you know where to look. It is the question of time. SpongeBob does not age. Patrick does not age. Squidward does not age. The characters of Bikini Bottom exist in a perpetual present. There is no birthday that moves them forward a year. There is no graduation that marks a transition. There is no future toward which they are progressing, and no past from which they are escaping. They simply are. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, whom we mentioned earlier, proposed a thought experiment that he called eternal recurrence. Imagine, Nietzsche said, that your life as you have lived it, every moment, every pain, every joy, every boring afternoon, and every sleepless night, imagine that you had to live it again, and again, and again, infinitely. The exact same life, repeating forever, with no changes and no escape. How would you respond to this? Would you despair? Would you scream? Or would you, as Nietzsche hoped, embrace it? Would you say yes to the repetition? Would you love your life so completely that the prospect of living it again, forever, fills you not with dread, but with gratitude? This is the test, and SpongeBob passes it. SpongeBob lives in eternal recurrence. His life literally repeats. Every episode resets. Every disaster is undone. Every relationship returns to its starting point. And SpongeBob does not fight this. He does not rage against the repetition. He welcomes it. Each new day is not a burden. It is a gift. Each new episode is not a prison. It is a playground. Nietzsche believed that the person who could embrace eternal recurrence, who could look at their life and say, yes, I would live this again, was the highest type of human being. He called this person the Übermensch, the overman, someone who has moved beyond the need for external validation, beyond the need for cosmic meaning, beyond the need for anything other than the sheer experience of being alive. SpongeBob is the Übermensch, not because he is powerful or brilliant or exceptional by any conventional standard, but because he has achieved something that Nietzsche believed most people never would. He has said yes to his life, all of it. Unconditionally. Think about what that means. Saying yes to your life does not mean saying yes to the good parts. Everyone can do that. Saying yes to your life means saying yes to the boredom, to the repetition, to the failures, to the rejections, to the mornings when you do not want to get out of bed, to the days when nothing goes right, to the people who do not appreciate you, to the systems that do not serve you. It means looking at the full, unedited reality of your existence and saying, I would have this again. I would choose this. Not because it is perfect, but because it is mine. This is what Nietzsche meant by the highest affirmation of life. And it is what SpongeBob demonstrates every single morning when his alarm clock goes off and he leaps out of bed with a smile that no alarm clock should be able to produce. There is a scene in the episode, Something Smells, which aired on October 26th, 2000, as part of Season 2, where SpongeBob eats a sundae made with onions and ketchup. The result is breath so terrible that everyone he encounters runs away from him in horror. SpongeBob, not realizing the problem is his breath, concludes that he is ugly. Patrick, in a surprisingly lucid moment, teaches SpongeBob to say, I am ugly and I am proud. SpongeBob repeats this mantra louder and louder until he is shouting it with genuine conviction. The scene is played entirely for comedy, but there is something powerful happening beneath the joke. SpongeBob is being taught to accept what he believes to be a fundamental flaw, and to own it rather than being destroyed by it. He is being taught that shame only has power over you if you refuse to look at it. That the things you are afraid of about yourself lose their sting the moment you say them out loud. This is a therapeutic technique. It is called paradoxical intention, and it was developed by the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and went on to found logotherapy, a form of psychotherapy centered on the search for meaning. Frankl discovered that when patients confronted their fears directly, when they intentionally did or said the thing they were most afraid of, the fear often dissolved. Not because the fear was irrational, but because the act of confronting it transformed the person's relationship to it. SpongeBob, in his Sunday breath innocence, stumbles into one of the most powerful psychological techniques ever developed. He faces his perceived ugliness, not with denial or avoidance, but with radical acceptance. And in doing so, he transcends it. The ugliness stops mattering, not because it has gone away, but because SpongeBob has decided that it does not define him. There is something else about time in SpongeBob that deserves attention. The show has now outlived its creator. Steven Hillenburg passed away on November 26, 2018. The show continued. New episodes were produced. New characters were introduced. The machine kept running. And this raises a question that has no easy answer. Does SpongeBob still belong to Hillenburg? Can a creation outlive the philosophy of its creator? When the person who understood the show's deepest meanings is gone, can those meanings survive? There are those who would argue that the show has changed since Hillenburg's death, that the episodes produced without his guidance lack something essential, some spark of authenticity that cannot be replicated. And there are those who would argue that the show has evolved, that new writers have brought new perspectives, and that this is natural and even desirable. But here is what is philosophically interesting. SpongeBob himself has not changed. The character, the yellow sponge with the square pants and the relentless optimism, is the same. The world around him has shifted. The writing, the style, the cultural context. But SpongeBob's core philosophical stance remains intact. He still wakes up happy. He still flips patties with love. He still annoys Squidward and befriends Patrick and catches jellyfish. This is a kind of immortality. Not the immortality of a body that does not die, but the immortality of an idea that persists. Hillenburg created something that transcends him. The philosophy he embedded in SpongeBob, the absurdist joy, the commitment to craft, the refusal to let meaninglessness be the final word. These ideas continue to resonate long after their creator has gone. The philosopher Jacques Derrida wrote about the concept of the trace, the way in which a creator leaves marks on their creation that persist even in their absence. Hillenburg's trace is everywhere in SpongeBob. It is in the marine biology that grounds the show's world building. It is in the warmth of the humor. It is in the insistence that beneath the silliness, there is something worth paying attention to. And perhaps this is the final answer to the question of meaning. Perhaps meaning does not require permanence. Perhaps a life can be meaningful, even if it ends. Perhaps a show can carry the philosophy of its creator, even after that creator is gone. Perhaps the Krabby Patty, consumed and forgotten, still matters because the act of making it with love created something that outlasts the patty itself. Hillenburg made his Krabby Patties, and they were good. And even now, years after he is gone, people are still eating them, still being nourished by them, still finding something in their flavor that speaks to a hunger they did not know they had. There is a beautiful paradox here. Hillenburg, the marine biologist turned animator, created a world at the bottom of an ocean he had studied for years. He gave that world to us. And in doing so, he demonstrated the very philosophy that his creation embodies. He found meaning in his work. He poured care into his craft. He treated each episode as SpongeBob treats each Krabby Patty, not as a disposable product to be consumed and forgotten, but as something worth doing well for its own sake. The show survived him because it carries his philosophy within it, encoded in every frame, every joke, every gentle moment. When SpongeBob wakes up happy, that is Hillenburg's philosophy made visible. When Squidward struggles with his own self-imposed limitations, that is Hillenburg asking us to examine ours. When Patrick sits contentedly under his rock, that is Hillenburg suggesting that maybe we all need less than we think. And when the sun sets over Bikini Bottom, and the Hawaiian guitar plays, and the characters rest after another day of absurd, beautiful, impossible life at the bottom of the sea, that is Hillenburg reminding us that some things are worth making, some things are worth watching, some things are worth caring about, even when the universe provides no particular reason to care. SpongeBob SquarePants is one of those things. It is a small, yellow, square-shaped argument for the proposition that life is worth living. And after 25 years, across hundreds of episodes, through cultural shifts and generational changes and the death of its creator, that argument has not weakened. If anything, it has grown stronger, because the world has grown darker, more cynical, more afraid. And SpongeBob has remained the same. Still happy, still kind, still flipping patties as though each one matters. And each one does. And maybe that is the final lesson. Not just to choose joy, or to reject bad faith, or to find contentment in simplicity, or to examine the systems that shape our lives, but to notice, to pay attention, to see the water we are swimming through, and to marvel at it, even though, or especially because, we cannot escape it. Before we draw all of these threads together, let us spend a moment with something that most philosophical analyses of SpongeBob overlook entirely: the role of music. Music in SpongeBob SquarePants is not decorative, it is essential. The show's use of production library music, particularly tracks from the associated production music library, creates an emotional landscape that is inseparable from the comedy and the philosophy. Tracks like Grass Skirt Chase, The Tip Top Polka, and Stadium Rave have become iconic not because they are musically complex, but because they perfectly capture the emotional register of the moments they accompany. But there is one piece of music in particular that stands above all others, and it is the one that plays during the show's most emotionally vulnerable moments. It is a Hawaiian steel guitar piece that creates a mood of gentle melancholy, of bittersweet reflection, of looking back at something you love, with the awareness that it will not last forever. This music plays during sunsets. It plays when characters sit on a hill and look out at the ocean. It plays in the quiet spaces between the jokes, in the moments when the show pauses and allows its characters to simply be. These moments are philosophically significant because they represent something that our culture desperately needs and rarely provides. They represent rest, not the rest of sleep or unconsciousness, but the rest of being fully present in a moment without needing to do anything, achieve anything, or become anything. Just sitting, just breathing, just existing. The philosopher Joseph Pieper, in his book Leisure, The Basis of Culture, argued that our obsession with work and productivity has impoverished our inner lives. We have forgotten how to be idle. We have lost the ability to simply be present without an agenda. And this loss, Pieper argued, is not just a personal failing. It is a cultural catastrophe. Because it is in leisure, in the quiet spaces between our activities, that we encounter the deepest truths about ourselves and our world. SpongeBob's quiet moments, the sunsets and the hillsides, and the gentle Hawaiian guitar are invitations to this kind of leisure. They ask us to stop doing and start being. They ask us to let go of our need for stimulation and entertainment and just sit with the show, with ourselves, with the simple fact of being alive. And perhaps this is why SpongeBob works so well as content to fall asleep to. Not because it is boring, but because it creates a space of safety and warmth and gentle presence that allows the mind to release its grip on the day's anxieties. The show is like a warm bath for the consciousness. It does not demand attention. It invites it. And when attention finally drifts away, when sleep begins to arrive, it does so gently, accompanied by the sound of waves and the distant strumming of a steel guitar. There is something else that deserves mention, and it is the relationship between SpongeBob and the audience. Because this relationship has changed over the 25 years of the show's existence, and that change tells us something important about the nature of cultural meaning. The children who watched SpongeBob's premiere in 1999 are now in their 30s. They grew up with SpongeBob. They watched him during childhood, revisited him during adolescence, and rediscovered him in adulthood. And something interesting happened in that rediscovery. The show did not change, but the viewers did. And the same episodes that once seemed like simple entertainment now seemed like something deeper, something philosophical. This is not because the viewers are projecting meaning onto the show that was never there. The meaning was always there. But children experience it differently than adults. A child watching SpongeBob sees a funny sponge who loves his job. An adult watching the same episode sees a portrait of someone who has found contentment in a world that offers no guarantees. Both interpretations are valid. Both are present in the text. The difference is in the viewer, not in the show. The literary critic Roland Barthes wrote about what he called the death of the author. The idea that the meaning of a text is not determined by the person who created it, but by the person who reads it. Each reader, each viewer, brings their own experience, their own knowledge, their own pain and joy, to the act of interpretation. And the text becomes a mirror that reflects these things back. SpongeBob has become this kind of mirror for an entire generation. It is the same show it has always been. But the people who watch it are not the same. They have lived. They have failed. They have loved and lost and struggled and survived. And when they return to SpongeBob, they bring all of this with them, and they see things they could not see before. This is not nostalgia. Nostalgia is the sentimental longing for a past that is simpler and purer than the present. What SpongeBob's adult audience experiences is something different. It is recognition. They look at SpongeBob's joy, and they recognize it as something they once had and have been trying to find again. They look at Squidward's misery, and they recognize it as something they are terrified of becoming. They look at Patrick's contentment, and they wonder whether they have been overcomplicating things all along. The show has not changed, but it means more now than it ever did, because the people who love it have lived enough to understand what it is really about. There is a final irony that I think is worth sitting with. SpongeBob SquarePants is, at its core, a show about finding happiness in a place where happiness should not be possible. The bottom of the ocean is dark, cold, and inhospitable. It is a place of crushing pressure and perpetual twilight. Nothing about it suggests warmth or comfort or joy, and yet Bikini Bottom is one of the warmest, most vibrant, most alive places in fiction. It is a place where flowers grow on the ocean floor, where the sun seems to shine underwater, where a sponge can own a house, and a starfish can be someone's best friend. It is a place that should not work by any logical or scientific standard, and yet it does. It works because the people who live there, all of them, even Squidward, even Mr. Krabs, even Plankton, have decided collectively and unconsciously that it is worth making it work. This is what communities do. They take inhospitable places and make them habitable. They take meaningless environments and fill them with meaning. They take cold, dark, crushing pressure and transform it through the sheer force of collective will and mutual care into something that looks like home. SpongeBob did not build Bikini Bottom. He was born into it. But he has done more than anyone to make it the place it is. Through his relentless, unreasonable, philosophically radical commitment to joy, he has transformed the bottom of the ocean into a place worth living. And in doing so, he has shown us that we can do the same, wherever we are, whatever our circumstances. However dark or cold or crushing our environment might be, we can make it a place worth living. We just have to decide to. We have traveled through a great deal of philosophy tonight. We have talked about Camus and the myth of Sisyphus. We have talked about Sartre and bad faith. We have examined Epicurean contentment through Patrick Starr and capitalist philosophy through Mr. Krabs. We have looked at the Enlightenment through Sandy Cheeks and unconditional presence through Gary the Snail. We have considered Bikini Bottom as a philosophical laboratory and the Krabby Patty as a phenomenological mirror. And all of it, every single thread, leads back to the same small yellow sponge in a pineapple under the sea. SpongeBob SquarePants is not a show about a sponge. It is a show about how to live. It asks the questions that every philosopher has ever asked, and it answers them in the simplest possible way. How do you find meaning in a world that does not offer any? You choose to create your own. How do you deal with a life that follows the same pattern day after day? You find wonder in the repetition. How do you live alongside people who are fundamentally different from you, who do not understand you, who may not even like you? You love them anyway. How do you face the absurdity of existence, the knowledge that nothing you do will last forever, that every patty you flip will be consumed and forgotten? You flip it with everything you have. You flip it with joy. You flip it as though it matters, because in the act of caring about something, anything, even something as small and insignificant as a hamburger, you have created meaning where there was none. SpongeBob is not naive. He is brave. It takes an enormous amount of courage to be happy in a world that gives you no reason to be. It takes strength to be kind when the world does not consistently reward kindness. It takes a kind of philosophical wisdom that most adults spend their entire lives searching for and never find. To look at the absurdity of existence and say, this is enough. this moment, this Patty, this friendship, this morning, this is enough. And maybe that is why Steven Hillenburg's creation has endured for more than 25 years. Not because of the jokes, although they are good. Not because of the animation, although it is distinctive. Not because of the merchandise, or the movies, or the cultural saturation. It has endured because somewhere, deep beneath the surface, beneath the colors, and the silliness, and the jellyfish and the pineapple, SpongeBob SquarePants tells us something we desperately need to hear. That it is okay to be happy for no reason. That you do not need permission to enjoy your life. That the secret formula, the one that Plankton has been searching for across hundreds of episodes and decades of failure, was never really about a burger at all. It was about choosing to love the life you have, even when it is absurd, especially when it is absurd. Let us now consider something that rarely gets discussed in analyses of SpongeBob, but that I think is essential to understanding the show's philosophical architecture. The role of the home. SpongeBob lives in a pineapple. Patrick lives under a rock. Squidward lives in an Easter Island head. Mr. Krabs, we can assume, lives in a house that is furnished as cheaply as possible. Sandy lives in a glass dome filled with air. Each character's home is a physical manifestation of their philosophy. SpongeBob's pineapple is organic, colorful, and warm. It is alive, quite literally, as a fruit. It has rooms and furniture, but there is something natural and unforced about it. The pineapple grew into a home. It was not constructed according to a blueprint. It emerged. And this is how SpongeBob approaches life. He does not build according to plans. He lets things grow. He is open to whatever shape life takes, and he makes himself comfortable within that shape. Patrick's rock is even more revealing. It is the simplest possible dwelling. No walls, no rooms, no furnishings, just a rock with a space underneath. And yet Patrick is content. His home tells us everything we need to know about his philosophy. He needs almost nothing to be happy. The gap between his desires and his circumstances is practically non-existent, which is why he experiences so little frustration. Squidward's Easter Island head is perhaps the most symbolically loaded home in the show. Easter Island heads, in real life, are monuments to a civilization that collapsed. They are symbols of ambition that exceeded resources, of a culture that built grand things at the cost of its own survival. Squidward lives inside a monument to failed grandeur. He aspires to greatness, to artistic recognition, to a life of culture and sophistication. And his home reminds us, every time we see it, that these aspirations are built on a foundation that has already crumbled. The philosopher Gaston Bachelard, in his book The Poetics of Space, argued that the house is not merely a place where we live. It is a symbol of our inner life, the rooms we inhabit, the corners we retreat to, the doors we open and close. All of these are expressions of our psychological landscape. If Bachelard is right, then the homes of Bikini Bottom are not just settings, they are self-portraits. And this adds another layer to the show's philosophical depth. SpongeBob's pineapple is his psyche made visible. It is warm, open, and welcoming. There are no locked doors in SpongeBob's pineapple. Anyone can enter. Anyone is welcome. Compare this to Squidward's Easter Island head, which is closed, fortified, and designed to keep people out. Squidward's home is a fortress against the world. SpongeBob's home is an invitation to it. The difference between these two homes is the difference between two approaches to existence. One says, the world is threatening, and I must protect myself from it. The other says, the world is interesting, and I want to let it in. There is also the matter of community in Bikini Bottom, which extends beyond individual relationships to encompass the entire social fabric of the town. Bikini Bottom has institutions. It has a hospital, Bikini Bottom Hospital. It has a jail. It has a school, Mrs. Puff's boating school. It has a government, presided over at various times by a mayor and a king. It has media, including a news program. It has commerce, dominated by the Krusty Krab, but including other businesses. These institutions form the scaffolding of civic life, the structures that allow a collection of individuals to function as a community. The political philosopher John Rawls, in his landmark work, A Theory of Justice, proposed a thought experiment called the Veil of Ignorance. Imagine, Rawls said, that you are designing a society from scratch, but you do not know what position you will occupy within that society. You do not know whether you will be rich or poor, talented or ordinary, healthy or sick. Behind this veil of ignorance, what kind of society would you design? Rawls argued that a rational person, uncertain of their future position, would design a society that is fair to everyone, especially to those who end up at the bottom, because you might be the one at the bottom. Bikini Bottom is interesting through the lens of Rawls because it is a society that is, in many ways, deeply unfair. Mr. Krabs exploits his workers. The government is ineffective. The justice system is unreliable. Social services are minimal. And yet the community holds together, not because of its institutions, which are weak, but because of its relationships, which are strong. This suggests something that Rawls's theory does not fully account for. That community is not primarily a product of institutions. It is a product of care, of the willingness of individuals to show up for each other, not because a system requires it, but because they choose to. Bikini Bottom works not because it is well governed, but because its citizens, for all their flaws, care about each other. SpongeBob is at the center of this caring. He is the town's heart, its emotional anchor, the person who shows up for everyone, regardless of whether they deserve it. When Squidward is in trouble, SpongeBob helps. When Mr. Krabs is in danger, SpongeBob acts. When a stranger needs assistance, SpongeBob is there. He is the living embodiment of the principle that a community is only as strong as its willingness to care for its most difficult members. And this brings us to a final philosophical question that the show poses but never explicitly answers. Is SpongeBob's goodness natural or chosen? The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that human beings are naturally good and that society corrupts them. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes argued the opposite, that human beings are naturally selfish and that only the structures of civilization prevent them from devouring each other. This debate, the debate over human nature, has raged for centuries and shows no sign of resolution. SpongeBob complicates this debate in an interesting way. On one hand, his goodness seems natural. It appears effortless. He does not struggle to be kind. He does not force himself to be generous. Goodness flows from him as naturally as water flows downhill. On the other hand, we have seen that SpongeBob exists in a world where goodness is not guaranteed. Doodlebob proved that the same basic template can produce something cruel and chaotic. Squidward proves that a character in identical circumstances can choose misery over joy. SpongeBob's goodness is not inevitable. It is, at least in part, a choice. And perhaps that is the answer. Perhaps goodness is both natural and chosen. Perhaps we are born with the capacity for goodness, but that capacity must be cultivated, practiced, and maintained through daily effort. Perhaps SpongeBob is good not because he cannot help it, but because he has spent so long practicing goodness that it has become second nature. The distinction between who he is and what he does has dissolved. His character and his choices have merged into a single, seamless way of being. The philosopher Aristotle called this state virtue. Virtue, for Aristotle, is not a feeling. It is not an impulse. It is a habit. A virtuous person is not someone who feels the urge to do good and follows it. A virtuous person is someone who has practiced doing good so consistently for so long that goodness has become automatic. It has become who they are. SpongeBob is virtuous in exactly this Aristotelian sense. His kindness is not performed. It is practiced. His joy is not forced. It is habitual. His love for his friends is not conditional. It is constitutive. These qualities are not things SpongeBob has. They are things SpongeBob is. And if Aristotle is right that virtue is a habit, then SpongeBob offers us the most hopeful message of all. That goodness can be learned. That joy can be practiced. That the life SpongeBob lives, a life of purpose, connection, and meaning, in the face of absurdity, is not a gift reserved for cartoon characters. It is a skill, and like any skill, it can be developed by anyone willing to put in the work. There is a conversation that has followed SpongeBob SquarePants since its earliest days, and it concerns the question of whether the show is really for children. The answer, I think, is that it is for everyone, but not in the way people usually mean when they say that. When people say a show is for everyone, they usually mean it operates on two levels. There is a surface level that children enjoy, the slapstick, the bright colors, the silly voices. And there is a deeper level that adults appreciate, the cultural references, the subtle humor, the occasional moment of genuine insight. This model, the dual audience model, is how most people understand shows like SpongeBob. But I think something different is happening here. I think SpongeBob operates on a single level, a level that is simultaneously accessible to children and profound for adults. The philosophy of the show is not hidden beneath the comedy. It is the comedy. When SpongeBob flips a patty with extraordinary care, that is both funny and meaningful. When Squidward slams his door in frustration, that is both a joke and a portrait of existential despair. The show does not wink at adults over the heads of children. It speaks to both audiences at the same time, about the same things, using the same language. This is extraordinarily difficult to achieve. Most creators, when they attempt to address both children and adults, end up serving neither well. The children's content feels dumbed down. The adult content feels forced and self-conscious. SpongeBob avoids both traps by simply being honest. It presents life as it actually is, absurd and beautiful and painful and funny, and trusts that both children and adults will recognize the truth in it. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein argued that the limits of our language are the limits of our world. What we can say determines what we can think, and what we can think determines what we can experience. If this is true, then SpongeBob has expanded the world of millions of people by giving them a language for ideas they might not otherwise have encountered. A child who watches SpongeBob may not know the word existentialism, but they understand, intuitively, that SpongeBob's happiness is a choice. They understand that Squidward's misery is self-inflicted. They understand that Patrick's simplicity has its own kind of value. They understand that Mr. Krabs' obsession with money has not made him happy. They are absorbing philosophy without knowing it, building a framework for understanding the world that will serve them long after they have outgrown the show itself. This is what the best children's entertainment does. It does not talk down to its audience. It does not simplify the world into easy categories of good and evil, success and failure. It presents the world in all its complexity and trusts that children are capable of handling it. SpongeBob trusts its audience more than almost any other show in the history of television. And that trust is repaid every time a 25-year-old watches an episode and discovers something they missed when they were 8. Let us consider one more philosophical dimension of the show before we close. The question of identity. Who is SpongeBob? This seems like a simple question. He is a sponge who lives in a pineapple and works at a fast food restaurant. But the more you think about it, the more complex it becomes. SpongeBob is not defined by his job, even though his job is central to his life. He is not defined by his possessions, which are minimal. He is not defined by his social status, which is unremarkable. He is not defined by his relationships, even though his relationships are deeply meaningful to him. He is not defined by his species, his appearance, or his address. So what defines SpongeBob? What makes him who he is? The philosopher Derek Parfit, in his groundbreaking work, Reasons and Persons, argued that personal identity is not what most of us think it is. We tend to believe that there is some essential self, some core that persists through time and makes us who we are. But Parfit argued that this belief is an illusion. There is no unchanging self. There are only patterns, patterns of memory, behavior, personality, and connection that create the impression of a continuous identity. If Parfit is right, then SpongeBob's identity is not located in any single trait or characteristic. It is located in the pattern of waking up happy, the pattern of greeting Gary, the pattern of walking to work with a bounce in his step, the pattern of caring deeply about things that the world considers unimportant. These patterns, repeated day after day, episode after episode, season after season, are who SpongeBob is. And this is, paradoxically, both reassuring and terrifying. It is reassuring because it means identity is not fixed. We are not stuck being who we were yesterday. We can change our patterns. We can choose new ones. SpongeBob is happy not because he was born happy, but because he has cultivated a pattern of happiness through consistent, daily practice. It is terrifying because it means identity is fragile. If SpongeBob stopped waking up happy, stopped caring about his patties, stopped loving his friends, he would, in a very real sense, stop being SpongeBob. His identity is not guaranteed. It must be maintained. It must be chosen, again and again, every single day. And is that not true for all of us? Are we not, each of us, a collection of patterns that we have chosen, consciously or unconsciously, and that we continue to choose each time we wake up? The person you are today is not a fixed thing. It is a process. It is something you are doing, not something you are. SpongeBob understands this. Every morning, he makes the choice. He chooses the pattern. He chooses to be SpongeBob. And in that choice, repeated thousands of times across hundreds of episodes and decades of storytelling, he demonstrates something that most philosophical systems take hundreds of pages to articulate. That you are what you do. That identity is practice. That happiness is not a destination, but a discipline. That the good life is not found but built, one day at a time, one patty at a time, one friendship at a time, one morning at a time. We live in a world that tells us constantly that happiness comes from outside. That if we just get the right job, the right relationship, the right house, the right body, the right bank balance, then we will finally be happy. SpongeBob has none of these things, not by conventional standards, and he is the happiest character on television. We live in a world that tells us that meaning must be discovered, that it exists somewhere out there, waiting for us to find it. SpongeBob does not discover meaning. He creates it. Every patty, every bubble, every jellyfishing expedition is an act of meaning-making. He does not wait for the universe to tell him what matters. He decides. We live in a world that tells us that growing up means becoming serious, practical, and resigned to the limitations of adult life. SpongeBob has been on the air for over 25 years, and he has not grown up. Not because he is immature, but because he has refused to accept the premise that joy is something you outgrow. That wonder is something you lose. That the capacity to be delighted by a simple thing, a good meal, a beautiful day, a friend's laughter, is something that must be sacrificed at the altar of maturity. SpongeBob is not a child refusing to grow up. He is an adult who has figured out something that most adults never do. That the best parts of childhood, the openness, the enthusiasm, the capacity for wonder, are not things you're supposed to leave behind. They are things you are supposed to fight for. They are things that the world will try to take from you through cynicism, through disappointment, through the slow grinding pressure of daily life. And your job, your real job, the job that matters more than any career, is to hold on to them. There is one final thing I want to leave you with tonight. It is not a philosophical argument. It is not a reference to a great thinker. It is an observation. SpongeBob SquarePants is a show about a sponge who lives at the bottom of the ocean. It should not matter. It should not be relevant to anyone's life. It should be disposable, forgettable, the kind of entertainment that you consume and discard without a second thought. And yet here we are, you and I, at this hour, in this moment, spending time together with a cartoon character who does not exist, talking about ideas that are thousands of years old, finding meaning in a show about a sponge and a starfish and a squid. Why? Because meaning is not proportional to seriousness. Because truth does not care what container it arrives in. Because a children's cartoon can contain more wisdom than a doctoral thesis if the people who made it cared enough to put it there. And Steven Hillenburg cared. He cared about the ocean. He cared about the characters. He cared about the audience. He cared about making something that was not just entertaining, but genuinely good. Not good in the sense of technically proficient. Good in the sense of nourishing. Good in the sense of making the world a slightly better place for having existed. And he succeeded. In a way that is almost impossible to quantify or explain. He succeeded. Billions of people have encountered SpongeBob SquarePants. millions have loved him. And some number of those millions, some unknowable fraction, have been genuinely changed by the experience. They learned something about joy, or about failure, or about friendship, or about the courage it takes to be happy in a world that gives you no reason to be. They learned it from a cartoon, and it was real. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum has argued that narrative art, stories, plays, films, and yes, cartoons, is not a distraction from philosophical understanding. It is a form of philosophical understanding. Through stories, we experience perspectives we could never access through abstract reasoning alone. We feel what it is like to be someone else. We develop what Nussbaum calls the narrative imagination, the ability to see the world through eyes that are not our own. SpongeBob has given millions of people the ability to see the world through the eyes of an absurd hero. An unreasonably happy sponge who faces the same challenges we all face. The meaningless job, the difficult neighbor, the friend who does not understand us, the boss who does not value us, the world that does not care about us, and who responds to all of it with love. Not the sentimental love of greeting cards and rom-coms. The fierce, stubborn, unreasonable love of someone who has looked at the absurdity of existence and decided that the appropriate response is not despair, but tenderness. Not withdrawal, but engagement. Not cynicism, but care. That is the philosophy of SpongeBob SquarePants. Not a system, not a theory, not an argument, but a practice. A daily, hourly, moment-by-moment practice of choosing joy in a world that offers no guarantee of it. And that is enough. More than enough. That is everything. Good night. Sleep well. And tomorrow, when you wake up, maybe try greeting the day the way SpongeBob does. Like it is the best thing that has ever happened to you. Because for SpongeBob, it always is. And maybe, if we practice hard enough, it can be for us too.